This year I built a ton of decks, got excited about more new commanders that I could possibly keep track of, and after a full year of Commander, these are the ones that actually stuck with me. Today I'm not doing a power ranking or a popularity contest by any means. These are simply 10 commanders released in 2025 that I personally think are awesome, very strong, and that I genuinely wanted to talk about after playing with and against them all year long. So if your favorite commander didn't make it on my list, that doesn't mean it isn't strong. It just means that it didn't stick with me in the same way as the others did. For each of these commanders, I will keep the format very simple. First, I will go over what the commander does, explain why it's good, show you the ways you can build it, and then I will be showing you 5 cards that synergize incredibly well with that specific commander. And one last thing before we get started, I'm not ranking these cards by their strength. I'll be walking through them by release order because this video is about the journey of the year, not a tier list. Alright, let's start where the year did, with my personal favorite set of 2025, Aether Drift. The set I ended up covering the most on the channel this year, Hashaton, Scarab's Fist. Hashaton was one of those commanders where the day it got revealed, the internet just completely lost it. Casual players were excited, high power players were excited, and even CDH players were pointing at this card like, yeah, this card might be a problem. And once you actually read the card, it's not that hard to see why. Hashaton is a 2-mana Esper commander with a deceptively simple but really absurd ability. Whenever you discard any creature card, you get the ability to pay 3 mana to create a 4/4 zombie token copy of that discarded creature. And that copy isn't just a vanilla 4/4 body. It will get everything from the discarded card. ETB effects, static abilities, attack triggers, whatever. So you can just discard something huge like a Razaket, an Elesh Norn, a Jingitaxias, then you just have to pay 3 mana and suddenly a copy of that massive creature is on the battlefield. And just that alone can end games on the spot very, very early. But what pushes Hashaton over the top though is the fact that the original discarded creature card just stays in your graveyard. You don't even have to exile it. That means after making a copy you can still reanimate the creature, recur it back to your hand, or just copy it again later. You're effectively getting multiple uses out of the same creature. And remember, all of this is happening with a commander that only costs you 2 mana. So even if Hashaton gets removed, just recasting him for 4 mana is still a completely fine deal. And in terms of deck building, Hashaton is really flexible. You can build him either as a more casual zombie tribal deck, you can build him as a graveyard-based reanimator deck, or you could even build him as a full-out combo deck. But no matter how you decide to build your Hashaton list, one thing will always remain true. And that is the fact that this is one of the strongest 2-mana commanders ever printed. Now let's take a look at 5 cards that make this commander completely absurd. And if there is one card that perfectly sums up what Hashaton wants to do, it is Tortured Existence. A 1-mana enchantment that will allow you for the low cost of 1 mana to discard any creature card and then return another creature card from your graveyard to your hand. And because Hashaton's ability doesn't even exile the discarded creature, you can just keep looping the same creatures over and over again. You discard a massive creature, you make a zombie copy of it with Hashaton, get another creature back to your hand, and then you just keep repeating it. You can use this card to set up some insane value loops, and it really abuses the fact that Hashaton's ability doesn't even exile the copied creature. And honestly, this is probably one of the best cards you can run in any sort of Hashaton deck. Obviously, we'll also need repeatable ways that allow us to discard cards. And what's better for that than a Psychic Frog? This card allows you to discard cards on instant speed whenever you want, and it will even grow its body with +1/+1 counters whenever you do so. When it deals combat damage to an opponent, you get to draw a card. And by exiling 3 cards from your graveyard, you can even give it evasion, making sure that it will connect and that you will get to draw a card. So this one card will give you a way to discard cards for Hashaton, it will draw you cards, and it can grow into a huge threat all by itself. And you get all of that in a 2-mana, very cute little frog package. With the amount of discarding you'll be doing in a Hashaton deck, Monument to Endurance turns into an absolute value machine. Every time you discard a card, you get to pick one option that hasn't been chosen yet this turn. You can choose to draw a card, generate a treasure token, or drain all of your opponents. And since often in this deck you will be discarding at instant speed, you can also discard during your opponent's turns, which means you can completely bypass the 3 times per turn restriction. If you do resolve an early Monument to Endurance, the amount of value it will generate you over the course of the game is absolutely bananas. Now we also want really big and impactful creatures to discard and copy, and Toxtril Decorrosive is one of the best. At the beginning of every end step, Toxtril will put a slime counter on each creature you don't control. And for as long as Toxtril is on the battlefield, all of those creatures will get -1/-1 for each slime counter they have on them. And yes, you did read the card right. Toxtril will trigger at the end of every end step, which means that in a full turn cycle you will get 4 Toxtril triggers, which can lock your opponents out of the game really quickly. Whenever a creature with a slime counter on it would die, you get to generate a 1/1 slug token, which you can sacrifice for just 2 mana to draw you a card. So yeah, Toxtril really does do it all. One-sided board control, card advantage, and a straight up game finisher. One of the best reanimation or copy targets you could ever ask for. And one of my personal favorite under the radar cards is Riptide Gearhulk. When you create a 4/4 zombie token copy out of this card with Hashaton, it will actually get the prowess and the double strike keywords, which will turn that zombie token into a real threat you can use to pressure your opponents. And whenever this creature enters the battlefield, for each opponent you get to pick one non-land permanent they control, and you get to tuck it back into their library third from top. Not exiling it, not bouncing it, just straight back into the deck, which is a great way to deal with any sort of indestructible card or to pseudo-remove anyone's commander. This card is disruptive, oppressive, and way stronger than it looks on first sight. Next up on this list is Ketramose, the new Dawn. This was one of those commanders that when it got revealed, I immediately had to stop and just reread the card, because for just 3 mana you're getting an absolutely insane stat line. A 4/4 creature with menace, lifelink, and indestructible, which on its own is already some insane value for that low of a cost. To balance it out, it has the restriction that you can't attack or block with it unless there are 7 or more cards in exile. But here's the important thing, those don't have to be your cards. Ketramose actually counts everyone's exile zones, making this a really easy requirement to meet in a 4-player game of Commander, especially due to the fact that exiling cards is where this commander really shines. Whenever 1 or more cards are put into exile from the battlefield or a graveyard during your turn, you get to lose 1 life and draw a card. Every time you exile a creature with removal, and every time you interact with an opponent's graveyard, Ketramose will reward you for it. This is an Orzhov commander that wants you to do what Orzhov already does best. Play interaction, disrupt your opponents, and grind out the game. And thanks to Ketramose having the indestructible keyword, he's actually really annoying to deal with once he hits the battlefield. In terms of deck building, there are a couple of really strong directions you can take Ketramose in. You can build a control shell focused on exile-based removal and graveyard hate, or you could lean into a blink-heavy strategy, continually exiling your own creatures and getting a ton of card draw in the process. And as for cards that go really well with Ketramose, let's start with 2 of the most obvious inclusions: Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares. These are already some of the most efficient removal cards ever printed, and they are auto-includes in any sort of Orzhov deck. But Ketramose pushes these cards even further over the top. Instead of just exiling any creature on instant speed for the low cost of 1 mana, you now also get to draw a card whenever you do it, which will turn these already absurd removal spells into cantrips that will replace themselves, making them even more valuable. And now that we're talking about really oppressive exile-based removal, another nasty card for this deck is Sheltered by Ghosts. Whenever this card enters the battlefield, you get to exile any non-land permanent an opponent controls until this card leaves the battlefield. Whenever you do enchant Ketramose with this enchantment, getting that permanent back is nearly impossible due to Ketramose having the indestructible keyword. And on top of that, this enchantment will also give your Ketramose Ward 2, which will make it even harder for your opponents to use any sort of targeted bounce or exile effects to actually deal with your commander. You get to remove a problematic permanent, you get to protect your commander, and you will get a Ketramose trigger all in one card. One of my favorite utility artifacts for Ketramose is Currency Converter. For 2 mana and tapping this, it allows you to draw a card and then discard a card. And whenever you discard a card for any reason, you get to exile it from your graveyard instead, which will immediately give you a Ketramose trigger. You can also tap this card to put one of the exiled cards by this effect back into your graveyard. If you use this effect on a land card, you will get to generate a treasure token, and if you use it on a non-land card, you will get a 2/2 zombie token. So this card brings a huge amount of things to the table. It sets up exile triggers for Ketramose, it can accelerate your mana, it can give you a solid board state with the zombie tokens, and it just keeps your graveyard stocked. It does a little bit of everything, but it does it very well. Another simple card that really overperforms when combined with Ketramose is Ghost Vacuum. For just 1 mana, you get an artifact you can tap to exile any card from any graveyard. With Ketramose on the battlefield, this little card will guarantee you 1 extra card draw every turn cycle, while also crippling your opponent's graveyards. And in the late game, by paying 6 mana and sacrificing this artifact, you get to create a 1/1 spirit token of any creature you exiled with this effect. And if you manage to exile some huge creatures like an Elesh Norn or a Tidespout Tyrant with this effect, it can just win you the game on the spot. And of course, I just have to mention the airbending mechanic we got in the Avatar set this year. There are many great cards with the airbending mechanic, but let's just take a simple one. Airbending Lesson. It's a simple cantrip that will allow you to exile any non-land permanent and you will be able to recast it again for just 2 generic mana, which is both fantastic to protect your creatures from any sort of board wipes or spot removal, and it's also a really great way to blink your creatures and get another use out of their enter the battlefield triggers. I'm pretty sure that since the airbending mechanic got released, all Ketramose decks got a lot stronger. Now let's get into the second set we got in 2025. Eshki, Temur's Roar. Eshki is, without question, one of the strongest commanders I built this year, and somehow she completely flew under the radar for many people, and for just 3 mana she puts in an absurd amount of work. First up, every creature spell you cast will put a +1/+1 counter on Eshki, which means that she will grow into a huge commander body by just playing the game. No setup required. Then if the creature you cast has 4 or greater power, you will get to draw a card, which is exactly what makes Eshki into an absolute value machine. Because you're not just playing big creatures, you'll constantly be refueling your hand whenever you do so. And finally, if the cast creature has 6 or more power, Eshki will deal damage equal to her power to each opponent. So every big creature you cast will turn into a table-wide burn spell. And once Eshki has a few counters on herself, she will close out games very quickly. And yes, before you ask, if you cast a creature with 6 or more power, you will get to trigger all 3 parts of Eshki's ability: the counter, the card draw, and the damage. And that's exactly what makes Eshki this powerful to me. She doesn't ask you to jump through any hoops or play around one specific mechanic. Instead, she just rewards you for doing one of the most fun things in Magic: playing big creatures. If your opponents don't disrupt you, this commander can snowball incredibly fast, closing out games as early as turn 4 or turn 5. And exactly that combination of simplicity and explosiveness is the reason why Eshki lives rent-free in my head. Now let's talk about some inclusions for Eshki. One of the best creature storm enablers you can play in this deck is a Null Drifter. At first sight, this card might look like a 7 mana Eldrazi, but the most important part is the fact that you can cast this card for just 3 mana by using its evoke mechanic. Even when you evoke it, meaning you have to sacrifice it the moment it hits the battlefield, you're still casting a 4 power creature, which means Eshki will get a +1/+1 counter, you get to draw a card of Eshki, and the Null Drifter itself will also draw you 2 additional cards. So for just 3 mana, you will get to draw 3 cards and you will get an Eshki trigger in the process, which is just fantastic to draw into new creatures and get even more Eshki triggers. And another card that's really disgusting when combined with Eshki is Chandra's Incinerator. later. Thanks to the last part of Eshki's ability dealing a ton of non-combat damage to all of your opponents, you will usually be able to cast this massive 6/6 trample body for just 1 red mana, which obviously whenever you cast it will trigger all 3 parts of Eshki's ability. But wait, because this card gets even better. Whenever you deal any sort of non-combat damage to any opponent, Chandra's Incinerator will also deal that much damage to a creature they control. So now every Eshki trigger won't just burn down your opponent's life totals, it will also clear their boards, which whenever you have Eshki on the field makes this deck go from really strong to really oppressive. Another perfect card to include in the deck is Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath. For just 3 mana you get to cast a 6 power creature that will trigger all 3 parts of Eshki's ability. You'll have to sacrifice it whenever it enters a battlefield, but honestly that doesn't really matter, because you will get a +1/+1 counter, the card draw, and the table-wide damage. On top of that, whenever you do decide to cast this creature, you will get a free growth spiral, drawing you a card and accelerating your mana. And later in the game, whenever Uro does end up in your graveyard, you can just escape it from your grave for 4 mana, which will still count as casting the creature, and it will give you another Eshki trigger. One of the most underrated cards we got this year in Tarkir Dragonstorm is Temur Battle Crier. This dude on a horse will reduce the cost of any spell you cast during your turn by 1 generic mana for each 4 power creature you control. Now obviously, since this creature already has 4 power, it will also count itself. And the entire point of an Eshki deck is playing high power creatures anyways, meaning that whenever this creature is on the battlefield, usually you will be able to get like a 2, 3, 4, 5 mana cost reduction out of this effect, which is just exactly what we want in this type of deck, because it will allow us to just keep chaining big creatures back to back and get a gazillion Eshki triggers every turn. And of course, I just had to showcase a card with the warp mechanic, Anti-Causal Vestige. The warp mechanic allows you to cast creatures for an alternate cost, but they will get exiled at the end of your turn. And once they are exiled by the warp effect, you will be able to cast them straight from exile by just paying their full mana cost. And specifically, an Anti-Causal Vestige is an insane card for this deck. Whenever it leaves the battlefield for any reason, it will draw you a card, so it will replace itself, and you will get the ability to put any permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield with a mana cost lower than the amount of lands you control. And as you can imagine, since we will be playing some really high cost permanents in this deck, you will be able to generate a huge amount of value of that. So by including this card in the deck, you're getting a creature that will trigger all 3 parts of Eshki's ability. You will be able to use it twice, first casting it for the warp mechanic and then for its full cost, and a way to cheat some huge permanents into play. All of that wrapped into one single card. Now let's dive into the Final Fantasy set with Cloud X Soldier, the commander that made me fall in love with equipment decks again. For 5 mana you get a 4/4 commander that has an immediate impact on the board thanks to him having haste. And whenever he does enter, you get to attach an equipment to him for free, regardless of the equip cost. And that ability alone is already really strong, especially with some of the biggest equipment in the game. But where things get really interesting is whenever Cloud attacks, because whenever he attacks, he will draw you a card for every attacking equipped creature you control. And this is what sets Cloud apart from any other equipment commander, because he doesn't reward you for stacking 7 million equipment on one single creature, but instead he will reward you for controlling multiple equipped creatures at once, which means mechanics like Living Weapon and Mirrodin suddenly become really incredible, because they will come attached to creature bodies. And then we also get a little nice cherry on top. If Cloud has 7 or more power whenever he attacks, which honestly is really easy to achieve with all of the equipment we're playing, we also get to generate 2 treasure tokens. So now your attacks will give you both card draw and mana acceleration for just doing what you want to do anyways in this deck. And what I love most about Cloud is how unique of an equipment commander he really is. Obviously you can build him as a Voltron commander just stacking 7 gazillion equipment onto Cloud, but I don't think that's the best direction to take this deck in. Cloud really shines the most whenever you do lean more into a go wide equipment strategy, spreading your equipment across multiple creatures and getting a ton of card draw in the process. He really does take equipment decks in a unique and refreshing direction, and that is the reason why Cloud stuck with me. And if there is one equipment that perfectly shows how strong Cloud can be, it is Colossus Hammer. It's a 1 mana equipment that will give a massive +10 10+10 stat boost. But usually in most decks it's totally unplayable because it has an equip cost of 8 mana. But thanks to Cloud we get to completely bypass that huge equip cost. You can just drop a Colossus Hammer on turn 1, then on a later turn you can just play Cloud, it will automatically attach to him, and you can just instantly go Oonga Boonga mode on your opponents. Thanks to Cloud having haste, you will instantly be able to swing with a massive 14/14 creature, which will also give you 2 treasure tokens by the way. This equipment alone already showcases how Cloud can turn some terrible equipment into pure value. And another great addition for equipment decks we got this year is Professor Hojo, a creature that reduces the cost of the first activated ability you use in a turn by 2 generic mana. And yes, since equipping is an activated ability, Professor Hojo will actually reduce that cost. On top of that, whenever any creature you control becomes a target of an activated ability, you get to draw a card. So now every time you do attach an equipment to a creature, you will get to generate card advantage in the process. And you get both of those fantastic abilities on just a 2-drop creature. Like I already mentioned, cards with the living weapon mechanic are just absolutely crazy with Cloud. And a Nettlecyst is probably one of the best. Whenever Nettlecyst enters a battlefield, it already comes attached to a 0/0 creature token, which already gives you an equipped body to swing with to get additional card draw of Cloud. And Nettlecyst will give a +1/+1 stat boost to the equipped creature for each artifact or enchantment we control. And since we are a full-on equipment deck, the stat boost that this card will give to the equipped creature will just be ridiculous. An easy way to add power, bodies, and additional card draw all at once. Now we also got one of the best equipment support creatures released this year, Cloud, Midgar Mercenary. Whenever it enters a battlefield, you get what is essentially a free Steel Shaper's gift, just tutoring any equipment card straight from your deck to your hand. And whenever any ability of an equipment attached to this creature would trigger, it will trigger an additional time, which is just perfect whenever you do manage to get one of the swords equipped to this creature. It will just allow you to double up on the already excellent value that these cards will generate you, making this card into a really solid equipment tutor on a stick and a really good equipment carrier. And a tiny little 1-drop creature that will do a ton of work in this type of deck is Zac Fair. By paying 1 generic mana, you get the ability to sacrifice this creature to give another creature you control indestructible, which is just a fantastic way to protect Cloud or any of your other value creatures. On top of that, you also get to attach any equipment that was on Zac onto the targeted creature, which makes this into an excellent effect to just shuffle your equipment around on instant speed. A really flexible card that will make equipment decks feel a lot more smooth instead of clunky. Next up we have Sephiroth, which, fun fact, ended up being the best performing video I've ever posted on this channel. And honestly, that totally makes sense because this card is absolutely mental. At first glance, Sephiroth might look like your generic mono black commander, but in reality he is the centerpiece of a sacrifice driven deck that takes over games one death at a time. For just 3 mana you get a 3/3 body that will immediately generate you value the turn it comes down. Whenever he enters a battlefield or attacks, you get the option to sacrifice another creature, and when you do, you get to draw a card. And that ability alone is already really flexible at any stage in the game. In the early game you can turn any of your tokens or sacrifice fodder into fresh cards. In the mid game you can sacrifice some value creatures you actually want to sacrifice to just cash in on value. And in the late game, this ability is a great way to get any of your sacrifice loops started. On top of that, Sephiroth has an ability that functions in exactly the same way as a blood artist. Whenever another creature dies, target opponent will lose 1 life and you will gain 1 life. And the best part is that this ability doesn't care about who owns the creature. It will trigger from sacrificing your creatures, creatures trading in combat, you casting board wipes, whatever. And if this ability resolves 4 times in 1 single turn, you get to transform Sephiroth, turning him into Sephiroth the One-Winged Angel, a massive 5/5 flying body. Now first up, whenever he does transform, you get to create an emblem that has exactly the same effect as his passive ability. And as of right now, in Magic there are no ways to to ever remove an emblem. You can't destroy it, you can bounce it, you can't make anyone sacrifice it, you will just control it for the rest of the game, just draining a player whenever any creature dies. And those little 1 life drain triggers actually do add up really fast. The longer the game goes on, the more creatures that'll die, and the more you will slowly bleed your opponents out. Before I forget, the backside of Sephiroth also has an incredible ability whenever you attack with it. It will allow you to sacrifice any number of other creatures and then you will get to draw that many cards, making his backside into one of the best sacrifice and card draw engines in the entire deck. In my opinion, one of the most satisfying and the strongest mono black commanders out there. And for cards that are absolutely crazy when combined with Sephiroth, let's start by talking about Forsaken Miner. A creature that looks like a simple 1-drop, but it gets absolutely crazy whenever you do combine it with Sephiroth, because you can recast this creature from your graveyard for just 1 black mana whenever you commit a crime. Targeting your opponents, any permanent they control, or anything in their graveyard counts as committing a crime. And in this deck, committing crimes is a really easy thing to do, because whenever a creature dies, Sephiroth will actually target ping an opponent, which makes Forsaken Miner in some sacrifice fodder that just keeps coming back over and over again, enabling you to get constant death triggers and easily be able to flip Sephiroth. It's cheap, recursive, and incredibly efficient. And a card that people totally lost their minds over whenever I did mention it in my Sephiroth video is Tombstone Stairwell. A really old and forgotten enchantment that barely any player knows, but it is absolutely the best card for a Sephiroth deck. At the beginning of each upkeep, every player will get to generate a 2/2 creature token for every creature in their graveyard. And yes, I didn't make a mistake. That's every upkeep, every player, and for every single creature card in their graveyard. In your average commander game, this usually means like 5, 10, 20 zombies entering the battlefield every single upkeep. And then at the beginning of each end step, all of those generated zombie tokens will be destroyed, which means a completely ridiculous number of creatures will just die over and over again every single turn, allow you to drain the table for an insane number of life, and usually this card will just end the game on the spot if not dealt with immediately. And obviously we're also playing everyone's favorite miserable 3-drop. Flashback Marauder. Whenever it enters the battlefield, each player has to sacrifice a creature. Early in the game, you can use this effect to snipe any mana dorks or any value creatures like Esper Sentinels, and later on, this effect is just absolutely brutal against some Voltron decks or decks that rely on just controlling their commander and no other creatures. Whenever you do have Sephiroth on the battlefield and every opponent controls a creature and you play your Flashback Marauder, this means 4 creatures will die and you instantly get to flip Sephiroth. And there are a ton of other 3-drop creatures with exactly the same effect as a Flashback Marauder. And if you do include a couple of these cards in your deck, it will turn into a really oppressive sacrifice machine. And this is also the perfect opportunity to showcase one of the newer aristocrat creatures we got this year, Susurian Voidborn. Now, unlike Blood Artist or the Sephiroth emblem, it will only trigger whenever any creature you control dies. But honestly, that's perfectly fine, because most Sephiroths are built to just sacrifice their own creatures anyways. The real spice though is the fact that this card has the warp mechanic. On a turn where you do know that you are about to sacrifice a gazillion creatures, you can just warp this card in for 1 mana, let it sit around for all the death triggers, and you can massively speed up the clock that your opponents are already on. You really don't need this creature to stick around forever, you just need it on the turn that things are about to get messy. And if you really do want to win games and lose all of your friends, Grave Pact is the fantastic option for that. It is by far one of the most oppressive enchantments ever printed. Whenever any of your creatures would die, every one of your opponents has to sacrifice one of their creatures. And in a Sephiroth deck where you will constantly be sacrificing your own sacrifice fodder creatures, you will easily be able to clear your opponent's boards whenever you do have the Grave Pact on the field. And versus any sort of creature-based deck, this card can create some sort of a soft lock on your opponents. Since whenever they do play a new creature, you can just sacrifice any of your sacrifice fodder to a sacrifice outlet, and your opponents won't ever be able to make anything stick to the battlefield. This card is absolutely brutal, it's miserable, and it will win you games. Alright, before we move on to the next commanders, I want to do something different. When I started working on this video, I really didn't want it to just be my personal picks. So I decided to open up a dedicated thread on the Panzer Discord, where I asked everyone for their personal top 3 commanders released in 2025. One submission per person, no discussion, and no influencing each other. And you guys really delivered. I spent way more time than I'd actually like to admit counting all of the votes. And once I was done counting, we have a very clear top 3. So this is a quick bonus segment in the middle of the video. The top 3 commanders of 2025 voted by the Panzer MTG community. Kicking off the top 3, we have Y'shtola the Knight's Blessed. And honestly, this one didn't surprise me at all. She was one of the commanders released in the Final Fantasy precons. And the moment this card got revealed, people got really excited and they started brewing her. Because this card is just absurdly efficient. For just 4 mana in Esper colors, you get a solid 2/4 body with vigilance and 2 really strong abilities. And the first one already pushes her way over the edge. At the beginning of every end step, if a player lost 4 or more life, you get to draw a card. And yes, that's every end step, not just yours. So if your opponents are attacking each other, they're pinging each other, or you are able to deal damage during someone else's turn, Y'shtola will just keep drawing you cards. And that ability alone already would make her into a really strong value commander. But then there's also the second ability. Whenever you cast any non-creature spell with mana value 3 or greater, Y'shtola will make every opponent lose 2 life and you will gain 2 life. Which means she can easily set up the card draw from her own first ability. Removal spells, counter magic, interaction on other players' turns, all of that will naturally trigger her first ability and draw you a ton of cards per turn cycle. What really pushes her into problematic commander territory is how well she scales with any sort of free interaction spells. Y'shtola doesn't care about the mana value you pay for the spell, it only cares about the spell's original mana cost. So cards like Force of Will, Fierce Guardianship, Force of Negation, Snuff Out, all of those will trigger her last ability even if you didn't pay any mana for them. And despite the Final Fantasy set not being out for a long time, Y'shtola is already sitting near the top of the most popular commanders over on EDH rack, which honestly almost never ever happens this fast. She's efficient, she's interactive, and honestly she is completely broken. And the community clearly agrees. One thing is for sure, she is one of the commanders that defined 2025 and she will be around for a really long time. And staying on theme of commanders that absolutely exploded in popularity this year, next up we have Fire Lord Azula, a 4-mana commander in Grixis colors with the Firebending 2 mechanic, meaning whenever Azula attacks you get to add 2 red mana to your mana pool and it will stick around until the end of combat. But the real reason why this card is this popular is her second ability. Any spell whenever Azula is attacking, you get to copy that spell for free. Any instant speed spell, any creature with a flash mechanic, whatever. Obviously this ability is very strong. Once Azula does get to attack, things will snowball very fast. And much like Y'shtola, her rise in popularity has been completely insane. Despite the Avatar set being the most recent set we got, Azula is already in the top 100 most popular commanders, which I think has never ever happened before this quickly. Now let me give you my honest take on Azula. I totally understand why people love this card as much, don't get me wrong, but personally I'm not really that impressed by the card. And that is because all Azula decks have one thing in common, and that is that they are incredibly telegraphed. You want to play her, untap with her, and you want to attack with her. But if your Azula gets removed before you ever get to attack with her, the deck just completely stalls and you won't be able to do anything anymore. Attack trigger commanders like this one that have to survive an entire turn cycle before they generate you value are obviously very strong when they work. They're just really inconsistent. So yeah, slightly controversial opinion, I really don't think Azula is all that great of a commander. That being said, the amount of people that requested me doing a video on Azula has been absolutely insane. In the Discord, over on Instagram, in the YouTube comments, and I'm sorry guys, I just really don't like the commander, so I won't ever be doing a video on it. So seriously, stop sending me requests for Azula videos. And now, the winner of this community poll, and honestly it wasn't even close, Teval, the balanced scale. Teval had nearly double the amount of votes of the previous cards, and almost anyone that voted had Teval somewhere in their top 3 list. And honestly, I totally get it. It's a 4 mana Sultai face commander of one of the Dragonstorm precons, and he is by far the most popular card in that entire set. It's a 4/4 flying creature with 2 deceptively simple abilities. Whenever Teval attacks, you get to mill 3 cards and then return a land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So by just attacking, you're already filling your graveyard and accelerating your mana without any other setup required. And this feeds directly into his second ability. Whenever one or more cards would leave your graveyard, you get to generate a 2/2 zombie token. And the important thing is that Teval doesn't actually care how those cards leave your graveyard. It will trigger off reanimation spells, cards with the flashback mechanic, the harmonize mechanic, exiling cards from your graveyard, and even when you are just returning cards from your graveyard to your hand. And what that means in practice is that Teval rewards you for what a Sultai deck wants to do anyways. Use your graveyard as a second hand, grind value, and just out-resource your opponents. And after seeing that Teval was this popular in the community, I just had to build him for myself. And I'll be completely honest, it is one of the strongest decks that I've ever built. It's resilient, it's flexible, and the 99 cards built around Teval are a really solid shell that even works whenever you don't have Teval on the battlefield. I'd honestly never thought I'd ever utter these words in my lifetime, but this Teval deck is really close to replacing my favorite deck, the Necrobloom. So yeah, Teval didn't just win the community vote. He defined the commander format in 2025 for all of you. And after playing him myself, I completely understand, and the community was absolutely right about this one. Now before we jump into the rest of my picks, if you're enjoying this video, hit the like button, hit subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon. And also let me know in the comments below the video which commander released in 2025 was your personal favorite. And a quick side note for everyone that is new to the channel, a lot of the commanders that I'm talking about today actually have dedicated videos on the channel where I go really in depth in how you should build the deck. All of the videos on those individual commanders are linked in the description. Now let's get back to the list and finish out this journey through 2025. If you already have been watching the channel for a while, you know that Landfall is my favorite archetype in Magic, and it always has been. And in 2025 we actually got a Landfall commander that really surprised me with how strong and how unique it really feels. Tannuk, Memorial Ensign. For just 3 mana in Gruul colors, you get a 2/4 body with an incredible ability. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, Tannuk will deal 1 damage to each opponent. And whenever this ability triggers for the second time in a single turn, you get to draw a card. And that's it. That's the entire text box. Tannuk turns every land you play into table-wide damage. And once you start hitting 2 land drops in a single turn, which honestly isn't all that hard to do, he becomes a really good card draw engine as well. The result of this is a landfall deck that plays more like a group slug deck. You play a land, you deal damage, you draw a card, and you just keep repeating this over and over again until someone looks up and they realize they're already at 10 life. And the craziest part is how little setup this strategy requires. Fetch lands, ramp, playing lands from your graveyard, everything you already want to be doing in a landfall deck anyways feeds directly into Tannuk. He gives Gruul Landfall a really good value engine and a really clear win condition. The first card I'd like to mention is a 1 mana enchantment that will turn Tannuk into an absolutely insane card draw machine. Keen Sense. Whenever the enchanted creature deals damage to an opponent, you get to draw a card. And since Tannuk will deal 1 damage to each opponent whenever a land enters the battlefield, it means you will get to draw 3 cards whenever you play a land. And like I mentioned, in a landfall deck you will have like 2, 3, 4, 5 lands entering the battlefield every single turn, and the amount of cards you will be able to draw off this little simple 1 mana card will be just bananas. An absurdly efficient card and exactly the kind of draw engine that Tannuk wants. And a really cool under the radar landfall card that barely anyone knows is Zeldincht. He allows you to play 1 additional land every turn, which is obviously already really great in any sort of landfall deck. But the interesting part is the downside this card brings. At the beginning of your end step, you will have to return any land you control back to your hand. And in this type of deck, that's actually a good thing, because this card will always guarantee you that you have lands in your hand on future turns, allowing you to just keep triggering Tannuk over and over again without ever running out of fuel. A card that does everything Tannuk wants in one package is Valakut Exploration. Whenever you drop a land with this on the battlefield, you will get to exile the top card of your library and you are allowed to play it until the end of the turn. And with the amount of landfall triggers we'll be able to generate in a single turn, this card will allow you to dig really deep into your library. And at the end of the turn, any card exiled by this enchantment that you didn't cast will just go to your graveyard. And then it will deal damage to each opponent equal to the amount of cards it actually put in your graveyard. So this enchantment digs through your deck, it adds even more group slug pressure, and it will put lands into your graveyard and you will be able to recur them later. A very efficient and very dangerous card. And where things get absolutely stupid is with cards that actually increase non-combat damage, like Ojer Axonil. Tannuk's landfall trigger will normally only deal 1 damage to each opponent. But whenever you have Ojer Axonil on the battlefield, the 1 damage will actually be boosted up to a number equal to Ojer's power, which means whenever you now make a land drop, it will deal 4 damage to each opponent, totaling in 12 damage for just playing 1 land. With both this card and Tannuk on the battlefield, just a couple of land drops will win you the game on the spot. And yet another example of how much landfall power creep we got this year is Traveling Chocobo, a cute little 3-drop burp that will allow us to play the top cards of our library if it are land cards, giving us a really solid way of generating some pseudo card advantage. But the real payoff on this card is its second ability. If a land entering the battlefield would trigger any ability of a permanent you control, it will trigger an additional time. This will double up on Tannuk's damage, it will double the token output of things like Skewed Swarm, it will double up on your Field of the Dead zombie production, and pretty much everything else you're doing in this deck. Next up, we have the only commander in this video I didn't do a separate deck about this year. And that's not because I didn't like it, it's just because I ran out of time between product releases this year. But I can guarantee you 2026 will be the year that I will be building everyone's favorite spaceship. Inspirit, Flagship Vessel. It's a legendary spacecraft that uses the station mechanic, meaning you can tap any creature you control to add charge counters onto this card equal to the tapped creature's power. And you can even tap creatures with summoning sickness to station this card. Once Inspirit has at least 1 charge counter, it will start generating you value passively. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you can put either a +1/+1 counter or 2 charge counters on target artifact you control. And the part that really sold me on this card is the fact that you are able to put charge counters onto other artifacts. Magic has a long history of weird forgotten cards that use charge counters, and Inspirit suddenly makes all of those cards viable, resulting in a deck that uses cards that no one has ever seen and making them absurdly strong by just keep stocking them up with charge counters every single turn. It's a really unique design space that suddenly makes some old cards really viable again. And once Inspirit gets to 8 charge counters, it will turn into a 5/5 flying creature that will give all other artifacts you control hexproof and indestructible. And whenever you get to that point, your entire board will become incredibly hard to deal with and sometimes nearly impossible to deal with. And let's start by talking about what is probably the most broken charge counter card ever printed. Magistrate Scepter. It's a 3 mana artifact that you usually have to make an additional 12 mana investment in to just take an extra turn. But the charge counters that Inspirit will generate you completely completely break this card. Because you can entirely skip the slow setup phase and get to 3 charge counters really quickly, which will translate in us being able to take extra turns very easily. Once you are able to generate a single charge counter outside of Inspirit on this artifact, things spiral out of control really quickly, because you'll just be able to put 3 charge counters per turn onto this card, tap it to take an extra turn, which will put another 3 charge counters on this card, and you can just start chaining infinite turns, winning you the game on the spot. And cards with charge counters don't just win you games, they also generate you an absurd amount of mana. Astral Cornucopia, along with cards like Ever-Flowing Chalice and Painted Prism, will turn charge counters into actual mana acceleration. Every counter Inspirit adds onto these cards is essentially an extra charge for the mana battery you can use later. And since Inspirit will be adding multiple charge counters every single turn over and over again, these little mana rocks will scale out of control really quickly, making sure you'll always have the mana available to fund whatever expensive artifact nonsense you want to do in this deck. One of the scariest win conditions you can play in this deck is a Darksteel Reactor, a 4 mana indestructible artifact that will get a charge counter at the beginning of every one of your upkeeps, and once it gets to 20 charge counters, you just instantly win the game. Now on its own, it already puts a clock on your opponents, but with Inspirit on the battlefield, that clock speeds up dramatically. Whenever you are able to stack additional charge counters on this card, either be it thanks to Inspirit or any other charge counter generator, you can threaten a game win surprisingly fast, and there is very little that your opponents can actually do about it. And a card that's basically an Ozai but for charge counters is a Resourceful Defense. Whenever any permanent with counters on it would leave the battlefield, you get to put those counters onto another permanent. Even though your opponents are able to remove your artifacts, they will never ever be able to remove your value. On top of that, the activated ability also allows you to shift your counters around on instant speed, which can be absolutely brutal. Just imagine having an Inspirit with like 50 charge counters on the battlefield. Activating this card and instantly moving them to your Darksteel Reactor will just win you the game on the spot, and your opponents will never ever see this coming. Obviously, I had to talk about a card with the proliferate mechanic. Patrolling Peacemaker. Whenever any opponent commits a crime, we get to proliferate, meaning we get to pick any number of permanents that have a counter on them and give them an additional one of those counters. And trust me, the amount of crimes happening in an average game of Commander is just absolutely insane. Blood Artist triggers, targeted removal, damage pinging, graveyard hate, whatever. Over the course of the game, this card will generate you an insane amount of proliferate triggers for absolutely free. And because proliferate actually works on charge counters, it allows this deck to spiral totally out of control. Next up, let's get into the Spider-Man set with Norman Osborn, also known as the Green Goblin. Norman is a dual-faced commander, and he does something we haven't seen much of before. This card is a graveyard casting engine disguised as a discard commander, which honestly plays totally different as any other commander released this year. Let's start with the front side. Norman is a 1/1 creature that can't be blocked, and whenever he does connect for combat damage, you get to connive, meaning you get to draw a card and then discard a card. And if the discarded card was a non-land card, you do get to put a +1/+1 counter onto Norman. If you don't have any other plays on turn 2, you'll always be really happy that you can cast Norman, because you will get an early discard engine online and you will be able to start filtering your hand. And one important thing about the dual-faced commander cards is that whenever they are in the command zone, you can actually choose which side you want to cast. So if you want to, you can instantly cast Green Goblin from the command zone for 4 mana, and you can completely skip Norman. Once Green Goblin hits the battlefield, things get wild. First up, any spell you cast from your graveyard will have its mana cost reduced by 2 generic mana. And that alone already works with a ton of mechanics. Flashback, Aftermath, Escape, Disturb, and of course with the newest mechanic we got in the Spider-Man set, Mayhem. And for as long as Green Goblin is on the battlefield, every card in your graveyard will get the Mayhem mechanic. Meaning if you did discard it this turn, you get the ability to just cast it from your graveyard. So the gameplay loop of this deck looks like this. You discard a card to any effect to generate you some value, the card will get Mayhem, you get to cast it again from your graveyard, the cost will be reduced by 2 mana thanks to Green Goblin, and the card doesn't even get exiled when you cast it by using the Mayhem mechanic. And from the moment this card got revealed, people immediately started brewing with it, especially CEDH players, because the combo potential that that this card has is absolutely insane. Underworld breach lines, infinite discard loops, the possibilities are really endless. And obviously, wheel effects are really good with Green Goblin, and one of the most efficient wheel effects ever printed is Tolarian Winds. For just 2 mana on instant speed, you get to discard your entire hand and then draw that many new cards. In a normal deck, that's a really risky reset. But in a Green Goblin deck, it is pure value. Because every card you just discarded will instantly get the Mayhem mechanic and you will be able to recast them. And all of those cards will cost 2 mana less thanks to Green Goblin's passive effect. So basically this card will refill your entire hand, stock up your graveyard, and set up an explosive turn where you get to recast all the cards you just discarded. Green Goblin also has a really good synergy with the cycling mechanic. And a perfect example of that is Countervailing Winds. Whenever an opponent is casting a scary spell, you can just cycle this away for 2 mana, you discard the card and you get to draw a new card replacing itself. Thanks to Green Goblin, you will be able to recast the spell instantly from your graveyard for just 1 blue mana, making it into a very flexible counterspell and exactly the sort of graveyard recursion value this entire deck is built around. A card that was obviously designed with Green Goblin in mind is Shadow of the Goblin, a 2 mana enchantment that will allow you to loot at the beginning of your first main phase, which is already some really great returning value, because you'll constantly be able to discard the cards you want, give them mayhem and just recast them. But on top of that, this card also has another ability. Whenever you cast a card from anywhere other than your hand, this enchantment will deal 1 damage to each opponent. And that is exactly what a Green Goblin deck aims to do, casting spells from our graveyard. On big storm turns where you will be able to cast multiple cards from your graveyard, this enchantment will actually give you a win condition. And talking about win conditions, Magmakin Artillerist. Whenever you discard 1 or more cards, this card will deal that much damage to each opponent. And in this type of deck, discarding cards is literally how the engine functions. Wheel effects, loot effects, conniving, cycling, all of it will turn into table-wide damage. And on top of that, this card also has the cycling mechanic itself, meaning you can just cycle it away, draw a new card, ping 1 damage to the table, and then you will be able to recast it for just 1 red mana thanks to Green Goblin's Mayhem effect. And to wrap things up, let's talk about one of my favorite payoff creatures for Green Goblin, Neerdief, Devious Diver. Whenever you cast any spell from your graveyard, you will get to draw a card and put a +1/+1 counter on Neerdief. And once you get a discard engine going with Green Goblin on the battlefield, things go absolutely crazy. You can just keep casting spells from your graveyard over and over again and you will be able to draw an immense amount of cards in the process. Whenever Neerdief gets tapped for any reason, target player has to mill cards equal to her power. And once she gets to a huge amount of power thanks to her counter stacking, you will be able to use this effect to just mill out one of your opponents or to get even more cards in your graveyard and just cast them on a later turn. And next up, we have my favorite commander in the entire Avatar set. And that's not just because of how cool he looks, but because his abilities feel really Rakdos and they are really unique and something we've never seen before. Ozai the Phoenix King. For 6 mana, you get a massive 7/7 haste trample body, which already makes him into a serious threat. And in the commander format, 7 power is a magic number because you will only need 3 commander hits to take someone out of the game on commander damage. And obviously, like all the firebenders, Ozai also has the firebending 4 mechanic, meaning every time Ozai attacks, you will get to add 4 red mana to your mana pool and it will stick around until the end of combat. And then you read the next line of text on the card. Whenever you would lose any unspent mana, it becomes red instead. And what this means is that for as long as Ozai is on the battlefield, you won't ever lose mana between steps and phases anymore. It will just stay stored as red mana forever. It's the Rakdos version of Omnath Locus of Mana, but way more explosive and way more aggressive. And once you have more than 6 mana floating, Ozai just levels up. He will gain Flying and Indestructible, turning him into a nearly unkillable game finisher. So however you do decide to build Ozai, either be it treasures, firebending, or just a mid-range shell, he will always play the same role. He turns mana generation into something that will eventually win you the game. Personally, I gravitate most towards a mass land destruction version of Ozai, but I'm also very aware of the fact that mass land destruction isn't a thing that is appreciated in most play groups. For me, this was one of the most memorable commanders of the entire year, and that is just because the moment I saw him, I knew I was going to build him. One of the most terrifying cards you can pair with Ozai is Aggravated Assault. Since every time you attack with Ozai, he will generate you 4 mana thanks to his firebending. And this enchantment has an activated ability for just 5 mana that will allow you to untap all your creatures and give you another combat phase. Which means by just investing 1 extra mana whenever you swing with Ozai, you will get to swing again, generate even more mana with the firebending, and deal a huge amount of damage in the process. And if you just have any other creature on the battlefield that allows you to produce at least 1 mana, you can just take an infinite amount of combat steps thanks to Aggravated Assault, because you will be generating 5 mana every single combat step, which will in most cases win you the game on the spot. And no matter how you do decide to build your Ozai deck, one thing is for sure, and that is that you will always have a huge amount of mana, making Torment of Hailfire one of the best X spells to invest that mana in and just win you the game. Because for every point of mana you invest into the X, you get to repeat the following process X times. Each opponent will have to either discard a card, sacrifice one of their non-land permanents, or they lose 3 life. And most of the time this spell will do a combination of all 3 of those things. This card will either win you the game on the spot whenever you cast it, or it will just leave the table stripped of resources. And a card that will catch people off guard every single time you cast it is Seize the Day. Thanks to Ozai having 7 power and haste, this little simple card represents lethal commander damage out of nowhere. You can swing in with your Ozai for 7 damage, use the 4 mana he generates to cast your Seize the Day from your hand, untap him, get an additional combat phase, swing in again, deal another 7 damage, use the mana he generates to flashback this spell, untap him, swing again, and you will have dealt 21 commander damage, instantly taking an opponent out of the game. It's a play your opponents will never ever see coming, and they will have to scoop up their cards before they even know what happened. And a little artifact that allows us to convert every single point of mana we generate with Ozai into actual power on our creatures is Demon Spine Whip. And since Ozai is a flying trample creature, it is one of the best targets to attach this equipment to. If you for example have like 20 mana stockpiled, just swing with your Ozai, pay 20 mana to discard's ability, and you will just be instantly able to take someone out of the game with it. Really efficient for just a 2 mana artifact. And as I already mentioned, in my opinion, the best way to play Ozai is in a mass land destruction spell. And what's a better spell for mass destruction than a Jokulhaups? Now the reason Ozai is this good with these kind of mass destruction abilities is the fact that he will get indestructible whenever you have 6 or more mana stockpiled. And at that point, casting a Jokulhaups is just absolutely devastating, because you will get to destroy all creatures, all lands, and all artifacts on the battlefield. And after that happened, only one thing will remain, and that is your massive 7/7 trample haste mana generating Phoenix King. Since your opponents don't have any lands anymore, it will take them a huge amount of turns to actually get lands back into play and just catch up. And we have a massive advantage, because even though we don't have any lands, we can just keep swinging with Ozai and he will generate his own mana. Like I mentioned, mass land destruction isn't appreciated in most playgroups, but if you really do want to push Ozai to its limit, this is absolutely the best way to do it. To close this list out, we're ending with a commander that made me say, yeah, this mechanic might be a problem. Toph. Hardheaded Teacher. In my opinion, Earthbending is one of the most broken mechanics that Wizards has printed in years, and Toph is the commander that abuses it the hardest. For 4 mana in Gruul colors, you get a 3/4 body with 2 really relevant abilities. When Toph enters the battlefield, you get the option to discard a card to return any instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. Now that ability isn't the reason why she's on this list, but it does make the deck very resilient. Because every time you cast her, you can just return any ram spell to your hand, any interaction spell, or even some of your game finishers. The real reason why this card is absolutely broken is her second ability. Whenever you cast any spell, you get to Earthbend 1, meaning you get to animate one of your lands into a creature and put a +1/+1 counter on it. Now while animating your lands into creatures is a really fun thing to do, it isn't the reason why Earthbending is this broken. The truly absurd line of text on Earthbending is this: whenever an Earthbend land land dies or gets exiled, it just returns to the battlefield tapped. And that single sentence entirely changes how lands function. Your opponents basically won't ever be able to interact with your lands anymore. They won't be able to destroy them, and they won't be able to exile them. And sacrificing lands isn't a downside anymore. It's a way you can actually generate a huge amount of value. You earthbend your lands, you sacrifice them for mana or some value, and then the lands just come back anyways. And you will even get landfall triggers whenever this happens. While most cards only allow you to earthbend once, Toph actually allows you to do so multiple times in a single turn, which is exactly why she had to be on this list. Let's start by talking about one of the coolest land creatures released in 2025. Famished Worldsire, which is a card that introduces the Devour Land mechanic, meaning whenever it enters the battlefield you get to sacrifice any number of your lands, and this creature will enter the battlefield with 3 +1/+1 counters for every land you sacrificed. And in most other decks, sacrificing your lands is a horrible drawback, but in a Toph deck where you are able to just earthbend your lands, it is pure value. Just play this card, sacrifice all of your earthbend lands, you will get a massive Famished Worldsire entering the battlefield, and those lands just come back to the battlefield anyways. And on top of that, whenever this creature enters the battlefield, you get to look at the top X cards of your library, X being this creature's power, and then you get to pick any number of those cards that are lands and you get to put them directly into play, which will accelerate your mana by an insane amount and give you a huge amount of landfall triggers. And I know, Scapeshift is a way better effect, but honestly this card is way cooler. There's also a really simple 1-drop creature that turns earthbending into an actual crime, and that is Orcish Lumberjack. Normally sacrificing your lands for a temporary burst of mana is a horrible deal, but with Orcish Lumberjack, if you sacrifice an earthbend forest, you will get 3 mana and the forest will then just return to the battlefield anyways, turning this into a 1 mana dork that will tap for 3 mana, which is just some absolutely ridiculous value. And another really good type of effect to play in this deck are cards like Springbloom Druid. Whenever this creature enters a battlefield, you get to sacrifice a land and tutor 2 basic lands from your deck straight onto the battlefield tapped. And since Toph triggers on spellcast, you will get to earthbend first, and then you will have to sacrifice a land. So you can just play this card, earthbend a land, this creature will then enter the battlefield, you can just sacrifice a land you just earthbended, it will return to the battlefield tapped, and you will get 2 free basic lands into play. Insane mana acceleration, 3 landfall triggers, and you get all of that into a simple 3-drop creature. If you want to lock your opponents completely out of the game, Constant Mists is the perfect card to do so. Now in itself, this is already a really oppressive card, but whenever you combine it with earthbending, it's just absolutely absurd. This card has the buyback mechanic, meaning whenever you cast it, you get the option to sacrifice a land, and instead of going to your graveyard, this card will then just return to your hand. And as you can imagine, you can just keep sacrificing your earthbend lands to this effect, and they will just keep coming back to the battlefield anyways. Whenever you do have Toph on the battlefield, as you cast this, you actually get to earthbend an additional land. Do keep in mind that sacrificing a land for paying the buyback cost is actually an additional cost, meaning you will have to sacrifice a land first and then you will get to earthbend with Toph. So it doesn't work in the same way as whenever you cast a Springbloom Druid. And the result of the combination of earthbending and Constant Mist is just the fact that your opponents will never ever be able to win by using combat damage. And to end this video, we need to talk about what is probably the most broken card released in the entirety of 2025. Badgermole Cup, a 2-mana creature that whenever it enters the battlefield allows you to earthbend 1, and whenever you tap any creature for mana, it will give you an additional green mana on top of that. And yes, since your earthbend lands are creatures, whenever you now tap them to produce mana, they will get the benefit of the Badgermole Cup, which means this creature will already enable you to have 4 mana available as early as turn 3. This card is just a really nice addition in a Toph deck because it will give you a really early earthbend land, and all of your earthbend lands will now just produce you double the mana, which is absolutely insane later in the game. And even though this card is sitting at a €50 price tag right now, I feel that the price is totally justified. It's honestly one of the most broken 2-drops ever printed, and it's taking over multiple formats. And that's it for my top 10 commanders of 2025. This year has been absolutely insane, and not just for the channel, but genuinely for my life. What started as me talking about a random zombie cabbage on YouTube turned into something that I could have never ever imagined. Waking up every single day and seeing people get inspired by my videos and get excited about the same commanders that I'm excited about, that honestly still doesn't feel real to me. I'm incredibly grateful for everyone that ever watched the video, ever dropped a comment, everyone in the Discord server, or even people that just quietly lurked and followed me along the way. You gave this channel momentum, meaning, and honestly direction. And I'll be honest, my passion for magic right now is higher than it has ever been. And being able to pour all of that passion, energy and love into these weekly videos and see that people genuinely care about them is something that I will never ever take for granted. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you for being here, thank you for making this year what it was, and thank you for giving me the chance to do this. And I'll see you all in 2026.